Hey, how's it going, captains? Admiral Tori here, and welcome aboard for another World of Warships video on my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sailing the Tier 6 Japanese aircraft carrier, the Ryujo. So somebody asked me how to deal with the Independence, and when someone says deal with the Independence, I'm guessing that you're playing the Ryujo. So I recently just repurchased the Ryujo because I wanted to play the Ryujo in the operations, the weekly operations, and at the same time I have not played the Ryujo for a very long time. It's pretty safe to say for that one. So Independence. Between the Ryujo and the Independence, the Ryujo is a better carrier compared to the Independence. And the reason why is because of her striking ability. Now, if you're facing an Independence who's running the 202, which is 2 fighters and 2 dive bombers, you are going to lose the air no matter how hard you try if you're running the strike loadout. Because the strike loadout on the Ryujo only comes with 1 fighter. But although you only got 1 set of zeros, you do have 2 sets of torpedo squadrons and 2 sets of dive bombers, which means that the Ryujo will out damage a air superiority Independence, and that's pretty obvious because air superiority, you're going to trade a lot of your firepower. But how about the strike loadout? Well, you're still going to win against a Independence. This is the classic Shokaku versus Lexington situation where the Independence doesn't have any sort of weapon to fend off your single fighter. Yes, you only have 1 0, but it's better than nothing. You do have the advantage over the Independence. If the Independence goes unchecked, I still believe that the Ryujo will still outdamage the Independence. In the case of the Lexington versus the Shokaku, that's the other way around because the Lexington gets the 1,000 pound bomb. While Independence, she doesn't have the 1,000 pound bomb. It doesn't mean that she can't do as much damage as the Ryujo, but you're at the mercy of the RNGs in the bombs. So overall, I think that most people will run the balance, Independence or air superiority. If you face an air superiority Independence, you're going to have to pick your engagement, pick your timing. It's all about the timing, it's all about the engagement, it's all about your route of attack. And you can't really throw a rock at the wall and expect some results. So in this case, you already know that you're going to lose against an Independence when it comes to the fighters. The only time you ever win against an Independence is when you're going against a strike Independence with the fighters, because your fighters going to shoot down the strike Independence planes while Independence got nothing against you because she doesn't have any fighter. But if you face a balance or air superiority, you're going to have some trouble, mainly the air superiority. Way back in the days when I was playing aircraft carrier, when I began with aircraft carriers, I think a year ago, I had a lot of trouble facing Bogues, Langleys, and Independence, especially because Independence fighters were very strong, those Wildcats. And at the time, I was not as experienced as I am today, which is pretty obvious. And the common route, of course, the common mind is always to throw as hard as you can in order to get some results. But today, I am way different when it comes to playing carriers. I think much more different than previously. Previously, I think that's the most common way for most players when they began playing carriers, is that how I'm going to get the damage, how I'm going to strike the ship, rather than determining your decision. Don't really, strategize your attack. And I think that's the key thing about the Ryujo. Now keep in mind, the Ryujo and the Independence are tier 6 carriers, and you can't really expect yourself to save up all your planes, at least save up a good amount of your planes to the end of the game. A lot of times when you play the Ryujo especially, is that you're going to play your cards. The same way as I talk about the Kaga, you got to play your cards. If you can't win the air, then you got to play your cards with your fighters, which means that you got to wisely allocate your fighters by sacrificing them in order to get a successful attack. So in the case of the Independents, yeah, the Independents will win the air, but if you can get a good strike with the Ryujo, the first good strike will pretty much outdamage an Independence. Now, if the Independence air superiority was really good at this game, then they probably get a solid 50k if they do the dive bomb attack when they know the ship doesn't have damage control, because one of the friendly ships probably force the damage control on the enemy ships, but in most cases you're not really expecting that much at tier 6. So I do have a gameplay with the Ryujo, and this was the first game in a year, but it just happens to be a really good game. Although the person specifically talked about how to deal with the Independents, I couldn't really find a game or expect a game to do well against an Independence, because like I said, the strategy is that you gotta sacrifice planes and then get a good run. But when you do that, the first half of the game you're going to do something, and then the other half you just got no planes, and I don't think that has any value to in terms of watching value. But I have already done a lot of videos about making decisions. That's what it's really about: planning your attack, making your decision. And I do have this game actually lasts all the way to the end, and somehow we managed to turn around, so I thought it was a solid game. So for your viewing pleasure, not only am I facing an Independence, the Independence player is stock. I know, right? It's crazy, but she does have tier 5 planes, but in most cases in that battle I didn't really face the Independence that often, so whether she's stock or not, she hasn't really been paying attention to me as a carrier player. It would make sense for me to find a really good Independence player, but if you think about it, we usually face average carrier players, especially at tier 6, so you will get those games where you get smashed. And like I said in my Kaga video, when you play aircraft carriers, it is extremely one-sided, and you can't really expect yourself to always do somewhat average. You sometimes get smashed, sometimes you do well. And in the case with the Ryujo is like a smaller scale version of the same situation as the Kaga, where you can't win the air, but you do have the striking potential like the Kaga, and you just got to figure out and play your cards correctly. So without further ado, let me show you guys the game that I have in storage for you guys to represent how powerful the Ryujo against the Independents. Alright you guys, welcome aboard the Ryujo. Now in this game, like I said, although I'm not facing an air superiority Independent, and the Independence is a balanced stock loadout, she still can pretty much do a lot of damage against me in terms of what I can do in the air. But in this game there was minimal contact, so whether she is fully upgraded or not, it doesn't really affect the point of this gameplay. So this game, I think this game was really good to display of how you should really play carriers, especially with the Ryujo. You know that you don't really have that many planes, and I just flipped through the leaderboard, you might have noticed, but there is a ton of tier 8 battleships. There is a North Carolina, there is a bunch of Bismarcks, and don't underestimate the Bismarck's anti-air. Bismarck has a superb long-range anti-air, and playing the Ryujo, you really don't have that much room to work with. So first things first, the most important part of playing aircraft carrier is securing ground. And when I say that, I mean reconnaissance. Now we learned something very important from the Battle Midway. The Japanese failed to do some reconnaissance and scouting, which is why they were caught with their pants down when the dive bombers came in. And in this case, in the beginning of the match, in almost every carrier game I play, I am very vigilant because I want to know where the enemy carrier is going to make her move. And if I don't see any torpedo bombers or fighters in the beginning of the match, mainly the torpedo bombers, I'm going to start questioning where the enemy has sent her torpedo bombers, mainly around the borders. And if you look on the map, yeah, there's a huge, on the right side of the map, of course, the east side is very open. So I'm going to go for this Farragut. Now, in any situation, do not, even for like the high tier carriers, do not go for a strike on those big capital ship in the beginning of the game, because that's when all of their anti-air is fully operational. And playing the Ryujo, you already know what's going to happen, so why keep throwing your planes at the enemy? And once at the late game where your cruisers do a lot of HE damage and knock out those anti-air, but you're out of torpedo planes and dive bombers, how are you going to turn the game around? So in this situation, being the bottom tier carrier, and you're also expected to do awful in this type of situation as an average carrier player, but since I am experienced, I figured out what to do. So I noticed that there's a big gap in the edge of the map, and I have not seen the Independence planes for quite some time. And there you go. With scouting and reconnaissance, I was able to spot the torpedo bombers and dive bombers. I'm going to intercept these torpedo bombers and dive bombers. And I should have done a strafe right there, but I was not confident enough. Now, I don't have torpedo acceleration, nor do I have the air supremacy, because this is a fresh new captain. In the port, I have like 4 points to my captain, but in the game, I only had 1 point. So the Independence is still searching for me. Luckily, I was able to send my carrier all the way to the west side. Now, what I like to do is I like to send my carrier towards the opposite direction of my planes, because if my planes were going one direction and they spot the enemy planes, then I will be on the other side of the map, which gives me enough time and warning to avoid the attack. And usually my fighter should be on the same side as where my carrier is going. So I'm going for the drop. Can't really expect that much, but I got really lucky with that one hit. I mean, if you look at that oval, that is like an unbelievable oval. Even with the Independence tier 5 planes, she was able to shoot down all of my zeros, which are tier 6. So yeah, you're still going to be outclassed by a stock Independence. Now, like I said, you don't have to be all hasty about your attack in the beginning of the game. Just sit back, be patient. Patience is one of the most important part of life, because sometimes when we're too hasty, we start to do things that shouldn't really happen. So I'm just monitoring the Bismarcks, these two Bismarcks, and I'm just waiting for the door of opportunity. You're going to notice in this game that I screw up a lot of my dive bomb attacks, so yeah, ignore the dive bomb attacks. I was just trying things out, and this is like the first carry game of the week after a hard week at school, of course. So I'm just positioning my torpedo bombers, trying to read the enemy movement. It's very important to read the enemy movement. I don't have the luxury like the Taiho or the Midway to throw my planes and set up right at the moment. So when I saw the Bismarck was in a favorable position. She slowed down, which means that she's going to have to accelerate, and this was the opening that I needed. Now, the Bismarck didn't really get pounded by HE, so her AA was still very powerful. I'm going to lose a fair amount of planes. She is turning away from my torpedo pattern, which is something that you shouldn't do against a Japanese carrier, because when you turn away, you're asking to get hit by more torpedoes. If you just turn in, take the torpedoes that you need, and you should be fine. And like I said, I don't have torpedo acceleration. If I had torpedo acceleration, most likely I would have got those other 2 torpedoes, which totals up to 6 hits. But that's alright. I'm not really expecting much from this game. Well, in the beginning of the game, of course, because I was just trying to get this match over with. I still have my fighter on the other side. You only got one fighter. Feels like playing the Essex, but a tier 6 Japanese version, if I put it that way. Got my dive bombers back out again. You might notice that my dive bombers aren't positioned to do the follow-up, if I put it that way, because normally I wait for my dive bombers before I go for the torpedo attack. And the reason why is because, like I said, I was not really expecting much from this game. But this is also a valid tactic, because sometimes what I like to do is I like to monitor the enemy's movement, like I said. So I'm reading this Bismarck, and I was hoping for somebody to set the Bismarck on fire. That not going to be the case, but hey, I'm waiting for her to force the damage control, and you're bound to witness some really awful drops. I'm trying to practice my chain drops here, and the reason I say chain drops is because I'm trying to separate these dive bombers and group them up. Going to go for another drop. That one is more successful. We landed one fire. That should be nice and burning on the Bismarck. Now I'm still looking for the Independence fighters and torpedo bombers. The Ryujo, like I said, she's just simply far better than the Independence. I mean, yes, Independence can shut down the Ryujo, and at the end of the game, nobody got any result because Independence is not doing damage, but you can't really do damage because Independence shut you down completely with those fighters. But like I said, just one opening is what you really need if you're going to win against an Independence, and I got that perfect opening because I took my time to attack the Bismarck. I didn't come from behind the Bismarck. Always want to go head on because head on is faster. The faster you can get your attack going, the better it is, because the longer you stay, the less planes you're going to have for your attack. So since you're in a really since you're bottom tier as a carrier and in a high tier game like the Bismarck and the North Carolina, normally you as a carrier usually want to strike the battleship, but in this case you want to avoid that. So I'm going to go for a strafe. Want to practice those strafes. Was able to get some successful strafe. Gonna try to fight the Independence fighter under the anti-air. So like I said, you don't want to strike any battleship at this moment. I only got lucky with the Bismarck because Bismarck was out of position. She gave me enough time for me to strike. So if you can't strike any battleships or cruisers, especially with anti-air, those defensive fire, try to pick off lonely targets or mainly destroyers. And destroyers are very crucial to winning these domination games because they are the front lines. And you might have noticed that we are behind because we're about to lose another flag and we're not winning the gunfight here. So I'm going to precisely take my time and attack this Kagero. Now Kagero kind of boxed herself inside here, and I will get very lucky with this kill. I'm just watching. Look at that. That torpedo will hit. Yes, yes. There we go. There we go. One more. There we have it. I should have not gotten the Kagero. If you were destroying that situation, well, first of all, if you see a carrier and you're alone, and that's not really a smart idea. But if I was in that Kagero as a carrier player, I've played destroyer games where I face carriers. If you're getting to in a anvil hammer drop, which is what you call it if you ever seen an anvil and hammer, basically you smash steel between a flat surface, which is the anvil, and a hammer. That's how you smelt steel and all that cool stuff. But they call it anvil and hammer attack because you are being squished together by two particular force, and in this case is two torpedo waves, which is a nice luxury as a Japanese carrier. So if you're in that situation, you want to turn into one of the torpedoes, and when the second comes in, slow down. That is most cases from what I've seen, but sometimes there's exceptions. You gotta really think fast, and sometimes people panic in the process. When I was, dropping my bombs on the Bismarck, I was not panicking. Panicking is very natural to most of us when we play games because we're very eager to figure out what's going on. So in this case, I'm not going to rush this Prince Eugen. I'm going to position my dive bombers, and even when I position my dive bombers perfectly fine, I'm going to screw up this attack. But the point is, you're about to see the next attack, which is going to be more difficult. In most situations with my torpedo bombers, usually most people who get in a situation with the torpedo bombers and they attack a Prince Eugen who is 2 tiers higher than them, they normally just rush it and screw up the attack. But in this case, you're going to witness some really nice anvil and hammer attacks on this Prince Eugen, even though I know the Prince Eugen has pretty nice anti-air. Now, the Prince Eugen does not have a defensive fire. And I'm guessing that, well, I haven't played the Prince Eugen yet, but she probably replaced something else with her defensive fire. And she's going to bank on the, we call her fighter. So I send my fighter. I'm going to sacrifice the fighter because I cannot let one of those two planes, which is the Independence or the fighter float plane, to screw up my attack. The Prince Eugen, she is turning, and I decided to split my torpedo bombers. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but here goes another anvil hammer attack. I could have, if the Prince Eugen continues to turn in one direction, I would have kept my 2 torpedo bombers on one side to go for the massive attack. But because the Prince Eugen swiftly turns from, I think she was turning port to starboard right away because I was expecting her to turn to port so I can do a double drop on one side. since she turned to port too early, it gave me enough time to send one of my other squadrons to the other side instead of resetting it up. Because if the Prince Eugen didn't turn that early and let my torpedo bombers continue towards her port side and pass her port side to the starboard side to do the double drop, and then she turned, I think if I trying to envision it correctly, but basically she turned too early and she gave me the sign to do the anvil and hammer attack. If I continue with the double drop side, I'm basically going in circles with my torpedo bombers, and when you go in circles, if you play carriers, if you go in circles too long, you're going to lose your planes and you basically screw over your attack, which is why, like I said, you want to be precise with your attack. I know that I'm a tier 6 carrier. I know I can't do much against these high tier planes, but somehow I'm managing to figure out how I'm going to proceed with the situation, how I'm going to attack, and even a tier 8 cruiser, although she's tier 8, I'm still able to screw her over because she made the wrong move. And like I said, you get a lot of the perception in the air because you can see where the movement is from the bird's eye view. If I was at Prince Eugen, I would have tried to stay to one side and don't turn too early. I want to bait the attack. Baiting is something that takes time and skill, and in most cases, like I said, people are panicking, right? So I'm guessing the Prince Eugen kind of panicked and decided to turn randomly, which gives me the leeway to do a good attack. So I'm still looking for destroyers because although the game is winding down to endgame, I can't really attack the North Carolina or the Bismarck because those guys are still full health. It seems to me that not many of the cruisers were focusing the anti-air on those battleships to weaken the anti-air. So I'm starting to shine at the late game part. In most cases, carriers are weak at late game, but since you are a tier 6 carriers and you can't do much early game, you can change the game on the late part. And in this case, I took out the destroyer, I took out the Prince Eugen, I did a lot of damage to Bismarck in the beginning game, and now I'm going to have to proceed with my next decision. North Carolina or the Bismarck. At this moment, I'm trying to decide which one I should strike. I look at the North Carolina, our friendly North Carolina on the B flag, and if the friendly North Carolina had full health, I would have struck the Bismarck. And I'm trying to scout for this Akatsuki. I want the friendly Akatsuki to take out that Akatsuki. Will be the last destroyer to deal with. I was going to strike the Akatsuki, but that would have been a complete waste because you know that it's going to take a while to set up for another attack to rearm and service these planes. So I decided to strike the North Carolina, which is not feasible because North Carolina has superb anti-air, and without the torpedo acceleration, yeah, it's going to take some time for these torpedoes to get there. The reason why I picked the North Carolina over the Bismarck, even though I know the Bismarck has a lower anti-air rating, is because our friendly North Carolina on the B flag was going to die, and I decided that you're gonna have to save one of these ships, and I decided to save the Edinburgh because the Edinburgh was still fairly a lot of health, and even she has like a fifth of health. If I save this Edinburgh, she can heal up and we still have a ship. While if I strike the Bismarck, most likely the Bismarck would have survived the strike because my dive bombers weren't even there to do the follow-up to finish up the Bismarck. At the same time, the Bismarck will take out the North Carolina, and if I let the North Carolina on the A flag, the enemy North Carolina, he would have also taken out the Edinburgh. So I was very precise about my decision, and I made the right decision to take out the North Carolina to save at least one of my ships. If I went with the other decision, most likely I would have lost the Edinburgh and also the North Carolina. So now we have one cruiser because I made the right decision to strike the North Carolina. Now our destroyer is going in. I'm going to go for a strike on this Bismarck. I sent my fighter in hopes of trying to take out the enemy float plane, but it didn't go so well because the Bismarck anti-air was still superb to take out my fighter. Now keep in mind, fighters have the best survivability, so yeah, that kind of gives you an idea that I sent like 2 to 3 fighters there and they both got taken out. So I was able to set one fire, that is what I needed, and I'm going for a torpedo attack on this Bismarck. Let's see if I go for a torpedo attack, or I think that is game. So you just notice that I am very slow with my attacks. You know, people get the idea that, oh, you gotta be really fast, constantly moving, but sometimes it's best to take things slowly, and I certainly did that. I look at the Bismarck, North Carolina, and I decided for North Carolina for the best, and I made the right choice. I didn't rush my attack on the Prince Eugen, nor did I panic. Panicking, I have history with panicking because, you know, when you play games and you're playing competitive, your heart is thumping, and when your heart is thumping, you're entering this adrenaline mode. And sometimes adrenaline mode does help you in certain things that you do, but in other things, when you're panicking, your performance actually drops, so you tend to do things that shouldn't happen if you're calm. So when I was attacking the Prince Eugen, I was very calm. I watched the situation and I adjust. If I was panicking, I would have rushed the attack and might have not killed the Prince Eugen, and it would have been a different game. Well, in terms of like Prince Eugen surviving, probably would kill our Akatsuki, and I wouldn't be able to strike that North Carolina because I probably would have went for another attack on the Prince Eugen. So aside from that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time on World of Warships.